The school on the hill in Claremore, Oklahoma, is a place of beauty, history, and tradition. The story of what is now known as Rogers State University is a story of people determined to bring higher education to their community and northeastern Oklahoma. Citizens who joined together to make a place for their school and who fought to keep it. Educators who transformed the school to keep up with a changing world. Legislators who saw education as a path to a better future. This is a story of how far the school on the hill has come in 100 years. The story begins before Oklahoma became a state.
You had two territories. You had Oklahoma Territory to the west that had started with the unassigned lands, which was opened by Land Run in 1889. Then you had the Indian Territory that had been here since the 1820s when the 5 civilized tribes were removed to the west.
The rolling hills around Claremore had been home to both the Osage and Cherokee, eventually becoming part of the Cherokee Nation in Indian Territory. By the late 1800s, the area was attracting settlers because of abundant water and good ranch land. When the railroad came through in the early 1900s, it assured Claremore's growth, attracting merchants, banks, and churches.
The reason Claremore was bigger had the railroad. The railroad came through. On the old railroads, you had to have a depot every 24 miles, federal law. Good source of water, good for the railroads, and so they established the little community of Claremore. Largely a mixed population of Cherokee Indians, of non-Indians who were in by permit and were laborers, merchants, attorneys, teachers. So you have this growing community in the 1880s and 90s and into the 20th century.
The community built several elementary schools, but there were no public high schools or colleges. In fact, there were no public institutions of higher education in all of Indian Territory.
If we were in 1907 and the years leading up, 1906, and the discussions between Indian Territory, where we reside, and Oklahoma Territory, there was an interest in combining them into one state, to combining those territories. But at the same time, there was a concern about the delivery of services, if you would.
When President Theodore Roosevelt signed a proclamation declaring Oklahoma a state on November 16, 1907, the former Oklahoma Territory had already established 7 publicly funded institutions of higher education. The eastern part of the state still had none.
Eastern Oklahoma has dominated politics. So suddenly, you become a state, all of these institutions supported by the people are over here in the old Oklahoma Territory. They say, wait a minute, we need our institutions as well.
Leaders in the newly established Rogers County would soon change that imbalance. Community leaders, led by A.L. Cates, editor of the Claremore Daily Progress, rallied for state-funded higher education. In 1909, Oklahoma's new state lawmakers, barely into their second session, passed House Bill 362 to establish the Eastern University Preparatory School.
There was a great debate in the Oklahoma legislature about the location of this new preparatory school that was destined for Eastern Oklahoma. And so on March 25, 1909, the legislation was passed and signed into law that created Eastern University Preparatory School. Now, it was not destined originally to be in Claremore. It was destined to be in places like Holdenville or Atoka, but Representative Wortman had enough political clout and worked very hard and was able to secure the location in Claremore.
The legislation required that the new school be located on 35 acres of land. There was no tract of land this big in Claremore. Editor Cates and his brothers William and Herbert donated 10 acres of land they owned up on a hill to the west of the city. A group of citizens, calling themselves the Hilltoppers, began to raise money for the rest. With the land and funding secured, construction began on the school's first building. Preparatory Hall was completed in 1912 and is listed on the National Register of Historic Sites. It's still a landmark in the community. Eastern University Preparatory School, known by students as the Prep, offered both a full high school curriculum and the equivalent of junior college courses. The first students were young men and women studying to enter the university or to prepare for jobs in the booming regional economy. Some of the students were local, some came from towns far away, and they boarded with Claremore families. The school brought the excitement of football, basketball, and baseball to town, and the teams were popular and well supported by the community. The school also offered many clubs and activities, and educated its students in the liberal and fine arts. One of the school's last graduates, Lynn Riggs, is remembered for his play Green Grow the Lilacs, that later became a hit musical, Oklahoma. By the spring of 1917, the school had an enrollment of 300 students and was continuing to grow under President Stephen M. Barrett. But change was on the horizon.
Well, from March 25, 1909, this school has always had involvement from the political life. In 1917, for a lack of funding, actually the governor helped veto the funding, and it simply closed the institution because the appropriations was not put into law in 1917, so the institution had to close because of political fighting.
Eastern University Preparatory School closed on March 31st, 1917. The community was unwilling to let such a fine building stand empty. Rogers County Representative Tom Kite championed the idea of maintaining an institution of higher education in Claremore. Many other states had already established military academies to train officers.
We need our own military academy. We need to be able to take these young kids like a Will Rogers, who's a little rambunctious, and get him over to the military academy, teach him how to be a sturdy young patriot. Well, they send him off to a military academy outside of the state. Doesn't like it, runs away, of course. The rest of the story, he becomes one of the greatest Americans of all time. But those forces come together to create an Oklahoma military academy.
And so Representative Kite and others convinced the legislature to not only open but fund this closed institution, to reopen it as Oklahoma Military Academy.
The second school on the hill. The first year of Oklahoma Military Academy was challenging. There was much work to be done to make the school into a military academy. The campus needed barracks and had none. The cadets spent their first fall and winter in tents.
You know, it's like living outside and it's cold and it's miserable, but you didn't dwell upon it. I mean, you weren't given enough time because the regiment says that you get up at 6:15 in the morning, you get dressed, you form up, you make sure everybody's there, and then you go to breakfast and then on to class.
The first president was Colonel Stephen Barrett, who returned to the school after serving as the last president of Eastern University Preparatory School. Colonel Barrett was convinced that cadets must learn life skills as well as train to become military officers.
I think he was a visionary leader. He not only wanted the cadets of OMA to have a practical education of, reading and writing and arithmetic and science and the things that you would do in 1919, but he also saw the need for a vocational type of, and perhaps he is truly the forerunner of our career tech education because of his vision to have a well-rounded cadet that not only was book smart, but was also practically smart and could work on things. So I think that he saw the value of educating a person both in the classroom as well as in the technical areas.
Well, while a kid or a son was getting that education, they were also learning to drill. to use weapons. They were learning about the science of war. They were learning the geometry about artillery. They were learning about communication skills in the Signal Corps. They were learning how to be front line officers on the field of battle. And with all of the discipline and the training, the camaraderie, the respect for tradition, that all of that brings with it.
By the spring of 1920, Meyer Hall had been built as barracks to house the cadets. During Colonel Barrett's tenure, the school developed a nationally recognized marching band and a championship football team. The 1920 OMA football team lost only 2 games all season and came to be known as the Miracle Team. In 1925, a new president, Colonel Walter Downs, made substantial changes to the school. He set up rules and regulations more like those at other military academies around the country.
It was very important to each of the presidents to create a good citizen. And to them, that meant discipline, training, and once you had gone through that period and learned, in a year or two, you're the squad leader and you're training 6 or 8 men the same as before.
Under Colonel Downs' leadership, funding for the ROTC program was assured. The Department of the Army once again supplied uniforms, equipment, and funding for buildings at the school. Enrollment at the Oklahoma Military Academy increased substantially. Colonel Downs also began a senior ROTC program at the school, and in a move that paid off handsomely, he managed to get an ROTC mounted cavalry program approved for the academy in 1930.
Of only 11 mounted units of ROTC in America, 8 are in senior colleges. The Oklahoma Military Academy is one of the 3 junior colleges having such units, and there are 64 of Uncle Sam's cavalry horses here for the cadets' drill work.
The year here on the hill was like my brother said, interesting, in particular the cavalry part of the thing, when we had horses in those days. And I remember the first day we marched down and get our mounts, and then the next thing we're doing, prepare to mount, dismount, prepare to mount, dismount. And that went on for about 2 weeks, till finally we got the horses started and learned how to ride one of them.
Riding is not the only thing which brings good training to the youth, for jumping hurdles is a part of the routine at the school.
With horses available to the cadets, it seemed natural to have a polo team. It eventually became one of the best in the nation for several decades. In fact, Will Rogers, a dedicated polo player himself, once paid for the entire team to travel to Southern California to take on the Stanford polo team.
He decided that he would pay the way for the OMA team to go out to California and play a tournament there and play other school teams. And he recruited another team especially to play OMA. That was the team from Stanford University. His son, Bill, played on the Stanford team.
On the polo field, we have the pleasure of meeting the Academy polo team. This team is the same Oklahoma Military Academy team which won the coveted Will Rogers Trophy by defeating Leland Stanford University.
They won 2 of the 3 matches. In December of 1934, Stanford ended up winning the final match, but OMA won the trophy that Will provided.
The Oklahoma Military Academy, the west point of the Southwest, situated as it is 200 feet above the city, dominates the surrounding terrain just as it dominates the military academies in the states. The report of Fire and Board from Washington, who with the Academy staff make their annual inspection to see if the Oklahoma Military Academy shall again be rated as one of the 20 honor military schools of the United States. A rating it has held for a long time. We hope these fine young men will never be in a war, but if they are, with this kind of training, they'll know what will afford them protection from either the enemy or the weather.
During the 1940s, like many other military academies, the Oklahoma Military Academy saw enrollment fall as young men were drafted for military service in World War II. In this same period, many OMA graduates from the 30s and early 40s served with distinction.
We had 10 men that went on to make general officer, and General William Potts, who was from Heavener, Oklahoma, was the highest ranking alumnus that we've ever had. He was a 3-star general. And then Colonel Ed Ramsey, who was a hero in the Philippines. And there are just so many from that era. It was just unbelievable.
Yes? Gerald, what can I do for you?
The 50s were years of reshaping the mission of the school. A new young president, Colonel Homer Ledbetter, was an enthusiastic promoter of the academy, and enrollment grew once again.
Here is seen one of the best examples of American youth seeking and finding enlightenment through knowledge. Through laboratories such as these have come the know-how to develop the modern miracles of plastics, penicillin, and the sulfa drug, modern advancement in radio and television, and yes, even the jet bomber and the atom bomb.
I had a friend that attended here the year prior to me coming back up here, and I just asked my mother one time, I had looked at his yearbook and I thought, man, I would sure look good in one of those military uniforms. I said, man, and I'm sure there's a lot of pretty girls in Claremore, and I said, oh, wouldn't I look nice? So I asked my mother if I could attend.
It was more difficult, like most things in life, it was more difficult than I envisioned. The rabbit period, and you ran everywhere on campus. You were not allowed to walk. You were not allowed to turn a corner. You had to stop. You had to do a left face or a right face and then start running again. And that went on from the time that you started. And of course you'd have upperclassmen that would be there, and harassment was just part of the deal. I mean, you passed by the door, you did 10 push-ups just because they figured some way for you to do it.
You've got young teenagers training other young teenagers, and it's not, if you've got teenagers at home, as an adult, it's hard training teenagers, but by and large, the Corps cadets did an outstanding job. And the guys that went on from here into the military, and if you look back through those yearbooks and some of the old films that are available, you'll see a very, very sharp military unit. And but just remember, they're still teenage kids when the sun goes down. A lot of them might not admit that, but most everybody was a little bit ornery.
And if you wanted to be accepted and wanted to be part of it, you had to give everything you had when you were here. You couldn't sit on the back row. You just couldn't. There was nobody here that could be unassociated with what was going on here. You had to be involved. You had to do something. So whether it was, write yearbook or the newspaper or sing in the choir or play tennis or whatever it was, everybody that I remember did something. They had something to do.
The fact that they followed much of the same customs and organizations here that they did at West Point. In fact, a great deal of it was quite similar as far as that was concerned, as far as discipline, the undergraduate versus the older men, the rabbits versus the older men. And as far as most of this, some parts of it were even tougher than West Point. I've lectured at West Point, but I didn't go there, so I can't exactly compare it. But whatever it was a wonderful education for me.
I just tell anybody if they ever had any question, whatever they thought about West Point or Annapolis or one of those, come here and look at this, because this was really known as the West Point of the Southwest.
A setback came in 1953 when the Department of the Army decided that two-year colleges could no longer offer senior ROTC programs. And there were other changes in store for the school on the Hill during the 50s. Day students were admitted to the school to study alongside the cadets. In keeping with military academy tradition, only young men were allowed on campus at that time. In 1957, night school classes were offered to area students, and for the first time, young women and some older, non-traditional students began to take classes at the Oklahoma Military Academy. Enrollment continued to grow, but the decade of the 60s brought many changes.
The 60s was definitely different from the 50s, but not in the military sense. These guys are just as dedicated as the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. The world was different in the 60s, you know. Yeah, the Vietnam thing occurred, and I think the country was more progressive than conservative.
The Academy developed a reputation as a place for young men who needed its structure, a school that could help them to become leaders.
Oklahomans are going there for a second opportunity at chances, maybe some young 16-year-old that doesn't quite fit into their hometown, and their parents think, oh, they need a little discipline. They need something that will help define their role in our society. Send them there.
Oklahoma Military Academy had its beginning in those post-World War I years because the nation was worried about the sagging physical shape of its youth. That sounds a great deal like the comments heard in this generation. But none of today's OMA cadets need worry about their physical conditioning. It's part of an organized routine at the Academy. The cadet is trained to stretch his muscles, just as he stretches his mind in the scholastic programs.
The motto is, you know, give us a boy and we'll make a man out of him. And they did that quite well.
And I have yet to meet any veteran or alum of OMA that doesn't have a sense of that camaraderie, that sense of discipline, that believes that that experience helped form the rest of their lives. It was a life-changing experience. Suddenly, they have clarity. They see where they are within the sense of their community. They see that they do have a duty beyond themselves.
When folks in the community talk about their children having attended OMA, they are very, very proud of the fact that they received such a quality education here locally from such a prestigious academic institution.
The Oklahoma legislature began to send signals that the school needed to be changed. And one proposal was for a coeducational junior college to open in place of the military academy. Colonel Ledbetter, after serving OMA for 16 years, the longest of any president of the military academy, resigned in 1964. The school's new president, General John F. Smoller, was a West Point graduate with a distinguished Army career and an academic background. Even though the school was still subject to legislative maneuvering, General Smoller was able to ensure the survival of the Oklahoma Military Academy for the next 4 years. He argued that the state needed to maintain the academy so that Oklahoma could do its part to prepare officers for the growing conflict in Vietnam. The Oklahoma legislature agreed with him, and the academy was safe for a while.
The institution had been essentially, and I don't think I'm overstating this, had been marked for demise some years earlier by the staff, if not the board, at the State Board of Regents for Higher Education. We know that for a fact because the vice president or whatever he was for academic affairs at the State Regents Office came to the campus some years later and said that they had anticipated that the institution would fade away.
When General Smoller resigned in 1968, his replacement was a man who knew the school on the Hill very well, Colonel John Horn. Horn, a 1939 OMA graduate, returned to assume the presidency after a noted career in the Air Force.
Colonel Horn was the first and only alumnus of the military academy ever to serve as the commandant here or as the president at the military academy.
He was to see the academy through to the end of its 52 years on the Hill. By the time Colonel Horn became its president in 1968, the school on the Hill was beginning to be affected by the deepening social changes in America.
Well, during the latter years of the Oklahoma Military Academy, I think our country was undergoing a transformation, and there was a growing sentiment against the Vietnam War. And I think to some extent the Oklahoma Military Academy was caught up in that.
I think the politics of the Vietnam War did have an impact on the success of an organization, an institution like OMA. No matter how excellent it was, no matter how focused it was on patriotism and discipline and values, during the Vietnam era, every discipline, every value, every bit of patriotism was under siege.
I think the Vietnamese War and the resulting anti-military feeling that came about from that kind of environment did feed the people who had some concept that this institution should no longer exist as a military academy, and allowed them to move their agenda forward in terms of providing for its demise.
The Oklahoma legislature continued to question the need for a military academy, and funding for the school was threatened year after year.
It would be a good place, you know, kind of out of the population center, and it had all those buildings, and put a fence around that place, you could make it a prison kind of an area, and that was a real fear on the part of the local townspeople.
The Oklahoma Regents for Higher Education voted in March of 1971 to change the school to a 2-year junior college. And in July of that year, the school officially became Claremore Junior College.
Well, at the time of the transition, it was a difficult time. Of course, the former cadets and the people who were in the cadet corps here at the college felt like the rug had been jerked from under them, and indeed it had. And of course, the townspeople didn't know. They had been used to the military academies for some 52 years, and it was very difficult for them to conceive of a different type of institution, namely comprehensive community junior college, because no one knew what that was. You know, what does that mean?
Colonel Horn resigned later that year. Dr. Richard Mosher had been hired as a consultant to help with the transition from a military academy to a 2-year college, and in the process became the next president of Claremore Junior College. Dr. Mosher was an experienced educator who had already presided over the opening of a new junior college in Colby, Kansas.
The legislature had just met the preceding spring, implemented the preceding spring, the transition from a military academy to a comprehensive junior college. Well, I thought, you know, in my wisdom, I thought surely if the legislature does that, they will follow that with adequate funding to change the role and function. I was totally wrong about that. They felt no commitment to fund the transition.
One of the first things that Dr. Mosher realized was that not all the OMA faculty would be able to make the transition to teaching junior college.
When I first came to Claremore Junior College, I was struck by the fact that the philosophy of the 2-year college, as I understood it, and the philosophy of the military academy were diametrically opposed. The philosophy of the military academy had to do with control and with structure, and very little, if you will, stepping outside the bounds. The philosophy of the community college was the exact opposite. It was not of control, it was of service. It was essentially to help people spread their wings, if you would, and spread their wings in all kinds of manner and ways.
Over the next few years, there would be many changes. In fact, change and innovation would be the operating principles at the school for quite a while.
I think it's pretty generally understood that Dr. Mosher just absolutely transformed this place. When he came in, it was in pretty sad shape, and over the period, you know, say at least the first 10 years, there were just major improvements made to this campus and to the programs, and I imagine it was probably kind of an exciting time to be on campus.
I didn't see us as being limited to Claremore or to Rogers County or to northeastern Oklahoma or to the state of Oklahoma, to the United States. I thought we were out to serve the world, you know.
One important step that had to be taken quickly was gaining accreditation for the new junior college. which was achieved by March of 1973. The growing stability and credibility of the school seemed to attract more students, and enrollment increased to 1,000 students by 1973. During this period, Dr. Mosher championed many of the programs that made Claremore Junior College unique. Dr. Mosher encouraged the opening of the Hank Thompson School of Country Music.
Early on, Eldon Shamblin, who is known as the greatest rhythm guitarist of all time, was involved as a faculty member here, and Leon McAuliffe, who also was very well known as one of the best steel players of all time, was also on the faculty here and led student bands here. Another faculty member that was here is Junior Brown, who's famous for his Get Steel guitar, which is a double neck guitar that has a steel part as well as a lead part. So you had some well-known faculty members here, well-known musicians who helped get the school started, and then from my understanding, a lot of people came out of the school that went on to do well in the country music field.
Well, it's 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my size, baby, for my size.
Well, when I first came to the School of Country Music, I was a band director, country band director. And I had the distinct honor and challenge of teaching music appreciation at the night class to Vietnam veterans who didn't want to take it. And it was a lot of fun. It was quite an experience. Well, we moved toward Western swing because we had the opportunity, these great talents were here, and because we needed more numbers, more student numbers. And you can stick more students in a Western swing band than a bluegrass band or a country band.
There'll be pennies from heaven for you and
me. Eldon Shamblin was the first teacher we got. He's a world famous, one of the best known guitarists in the world. In fact, on the front cover of Rolling Stone magazine one time it said, Eldon Shamblin, best rhythm guitarist in the world. And I was just blown away. No, he thought they didn't know what they were talking about. They shouldn't have put that on the front of it because he was always that way. He was with the Bob Wills Band from 1935 when they moved to Tulsa. And wherever you go, people know Eldon and his legacy.
Well, it was a tremendous time when we found out that there would be a lot of refugees coming to the United States. And President Mosher at that time felt that it would be only appropriate and a great opportunity for the institution to be able to bring some of those young people here. And so, in fact, that did happen, and 25 Vietnamese refugees were selected to come to this college. I had the unique opportunity to sponsor Swan Pham. Swan had left her family, her sisters had gone to Martinique, and she had chosen to come here, and she had no one. And she was extremely successful here in college, and then went on to be very, very successful. But it was, we spent a lot of time together, and it's just been a really wonderful experience, but not without many challenges. And it was very lonesome for her and the other Vietnamese students to have to leave their families. And they were able to adapt, and we were able to adapt. And I think that it made us a better person. And I've said for many years that we gained much more than what they could have ever gained from us. And we're very thankful for that opportunity.
The athletic schedule was expanded during the 1970s. Coach Ken Trickey led the CJC Thunderbirds basketball team to victory in the Region II Junior College Tournament in 1979.
Going on to the Claremore Junior College days, you know, they had success with coaches like Ken Trickey in basketball and Luther Martin in baseball, and a lot of good names, good players.
Enrollment at Claremore Junior College increased each year.
We have an institution here that's ready for people to come to it. Not everyone can come. They work, they live 60 miles away, a lot of reasons why they can't get here. And so that was when we decided, well, how can we get the education out to them? So we determined then that probably the high schools would be the best place because they already have facilities, already have people that are accustomed to going to them. So at one time we had college credit courses at 11 or 12 different high schools.
And that was very heartwarming. Again, it was feeding the idea that our community is not just Claremore, it's not just Rogers County, it's the region, and it'll be the world.
Dr. Mosher and the staff brought higher education to an entire region, an area that extended beyond the community of Claremore. Some thought it was time to give the school a new name to reflect this. It was one of CJC's graduates who led the push to rename the school.
Well, I went to a very small school, 26 miles from here, called Allowee. And there were 17 people in my graduating class, and I like to tell people I finished in the top 17. I knew that I wasn't ready to go to a University of Oklahoma or University of Tulsa, that I needed what I would call a transitional experience of a school with smaller class size and perhaps an opportunity to have a more close relationship with professors than what you might get at a bigger school with graduate teaching assistants in a class of 300. But it was through probably as much luck as anything else, one of the greatest decisions that I ever made because of what role the school ultimately played in me becoming a lawyer and also coming to Claremore, which allowed me to then ultimately enter the legislature.
Stratton Taylor, who at age 22 became the youngest state representative in Oklahoma history, introduced legislation that renamed the school Rogers State College in July of 1982.
The transition from, of course, Claremore Junior College to Rogers State College, I think, met with some raised eyebrows on the part of my colleagues in different institutions across the state, because it was rather an announcement that really we're not just a little two-year college. We intend to be a regional college, and regional in the broadest sense of the term.
Enrollment at Rogers State College rose dramatically, with more than 2,500 students coming up the hill to attend classes by the fall of 1983. Things were looking up at Rogers State, but the energy industry experienced one of its periodic downturns in the 80s.
As far as what happened in the 80s, there were many, many changes after the stabilization in the 1970s and this new institution. All of a sudden the bottom drops out of the economy in the early 80s, mid 80s, and then programs were lost and the athletics were lost.
Faced with record growth and a shortfall of almost $350,000, Dr. Mosher and the school's leaders had to make some difficult choices. The Rogers State College Board of Regents passed a resolution in December of 1983, directing Dr. Mosher to terminate both programs and staff without disrupting the programs at the school too much. It was time to look at both the changing nature of higher education and how best to serve the needs of students in the region. One progressive change was the creation of KNGX, the college's new radio station.
The information age means communication, and that's why Rogers State College is on the leading edge of a field that will play an ever-increasing part in tomorrow's business world, broadcasting.
With the leadership of longtime broadcaster Larry Filkins, students were heard on the air by August of 1980.
We bought the transmitter, installed it in a building by the tower, and we went on the air with about 10 watts. We had enough power to go to the railroad tracks here in Claremore, and that's about it.
This early experience in broadcasting prepared the college to make a dramatic step that would forever change the future of teaching. It was the late 1980s, and Dr. Mosher saw a new need in the college's rural community. He realized that now was not the time to bring the student to the college, but to bring the college to the student.
There was a opportunity to apply for a television station, and there was funding available. And so we used Mr. Larry Filkins, who was then the director of the radio station.
I got the only permit available left for this area for a TV station.
Good morning and welcome to KXON TV 35. We are broadcasting live this morning, our inaugural broadcast from Rogers State College in Claremore.
Cut that, baby, you bet. And applause is certainly appreciated.
KXON, UHF Television Channel 35, went on the air, offering innovative programming, including college-level courses. RSC had just become one of the nation's pioneers in distance learning.
We began what we call multiple learning opportunities, and there were 5 courses. I had one of the 5 courses that were taught, and we came here in the station and we taped. We didn't have a teleprompter yet. We created our own, we didn't have PowerPoint. We created our own posters for visual and had very elaborate notebooks and had them taped, and it was quite a production, and they were quite good, I think, the initial ones.
And sure, there was reticence at that time, or a reservation of not wanting to go forward into that realm, but it's like trying to stop an interstate coming through your farm. There's a point where you got to give it up. The interstate's going to come through and you either sell to the government or they make you move or whatever. And it's just that point where you have to get with it. And so as a result of that, I think we have very diverse distance ed learning opportunities around here, and a number of very highly qualified faculty who not only have embraced it, but have really led the way in many ways in distance education, not just in the state, but in the country.
The late 80s also saw expansion of the school in new ways as Rogers State College reached out to other communities and opened centers at Pryor and Bartlesville. By the early 90s, Rogers State enrollment and outreach programs was almost 30% of the total number of students enrolled, clearly indicating a need for the non-traditional approach. During the early 90s, another change was under discussion, a merger with another institution. A decision was made to merge with the University Center at Tulsa under the presidency of Roger Randall.
And the reasoning was this: we get to keep being the 2-year college, but we get some additional courses at the Claremore campus, which allows us to, at a minimum, once again, move the ball forward, not have to drive into Tulsa for everything. And for people who are in Bonita, Jay, Welch, Nowat, etc., they will have at least an opportunity to do it as well. We merge.
During the negotiations and talks of mergers, Dr. Mosher had resigned, and Roger Randall now assumed the presidency of the new institution, named Rogers University. The merger would allow Claremore students to take upper division and even graduate courses. President Randall had long wanted to offer lower division classes, which state legislators had not allowed at the former University Center at Tulsa. The merger had seemed like a workable idea, but the new Rogers University was not to last very long, and the next school on the hill was about to emerge. By the 90s, Stratton Taylor had become a state senator and was unanimously elected by his fellow legislators to serve as Senate President Tempore for 4 terms. It was Senator Taylor's leadership and his legislation that would set the stage for the next chapter in the school's history.
And as President Pro Tem of the Senate, I make a decision for our area that basically says, Tulsa, you can fight however you want. You can decide what kind of future you want to have for higher education. But there's 250,000 people out here that aren't going to be left out of this debate, this discussion, and aren't going to be an afterthought. We're 50% of what you are. We're not obviously necessarily entitled to exactly what you get, but we're entitled to something. And so I tell them, we're going to take this institution and we're going to create a Rogers State University.
On June 3, 1998, Governor Frank Keating signed the bill creating Rogers State University, and the school on the Hill could finally come into its own as a 4-year university.
So it was not a hard sell. Stratton Taylor was the President Pro Tem of the Senate. He was extremely important during that period of time. And people like Larry Rice, he was a member of the state legislature during all of this period. He understood the importance of an excellent school here. And Charlie Ford, Senator Charles Ford from Tulsa. To have powerful legislators from Tulsa understand the importance of the success of a university designation for this school in Claremore made good sense. And as long as it had its own course offerings, it had a focus on high academics, it would provide, again, that workforce opportunity that the businesses in the greater Tulsa area needed. As far as I was concerned, it was the right thing to do, and we did it, and it's been enormously successful.
Rogers State University's first president, Dr. Joe Wiley, brought experience as vice president at a 4-year regional college, Southeastern Oklahoma State University in Durant, Oklahoma.
Of course, the challenges that we encountered were, as you might suspect, they were the challenge of converting an institution from one that had a long, decades-long history of offering 2-year degrees to a fairly special population to that of a traditional university offering 4-year degrees and ultimately master's degrees to the general population in northeastern Oklahoma, and that was the challenge that we had to face.
First was the accreditation needed to grant 4-year degrees. Rogers State University achieved this in record time, gaining accreditation in April of 2000.
There was a member of the state regents who said, well, they'll never get accredited. And as we all know, and that was also some of what the other critics said on a regular basis, they'll never get accredited. Well, as we all know, what's happened since then was there was record accreditation. The accreditation that was given was for the longest possible time before there had to be another visit by the accrediting agencies.
We went through an enormously intensive process to document what our strengths were to begin with, and then focus on what we needed to do to get to meeting the requirements for a regional institution.
We knew we had been successful after approximately 2 years when the accreditors came in, and they were very complimentary that what they saw there was a university. They saw policies, procedures, practices that were those components of a university, and we knew we were on the right track.
By the fall of 2000, the school was able to offer bachelor's degrees, including a Bachelor of Science, a Bachelor of Applied Technology, and a Bachelor of Arts. Many more were added later.
That was an exciting time. It was an amazing time. Students had been asking me for years, when are you going to change over to a 4-year university? And I said, never going to happen, never going to happen. And then it happened. But obviously, I mean, we had to design new programs, and that's one of the most exciting things I've ever been in my life.
RSU began to attract more traditional students who were looking for a 4-year college.
And the students are different. The students in the last several years are all traditional. Out of high school, I say all, it's not true. There's many non-traditional students still, but it used to be, it was non-traditional students, a community college kind of environment. Now it's a university setting.
Now that we're a 4-year university, we have actual majors in our area, and we do have a more of an opportunity to get to know the students, to work with them, and that's a very positive thing. We got to know the students in 2 years, but not as well. You know, and we didn't get them you know, we didn't see them develop as much and finish their programs and then go out into the world. And we do that now, and that's been wonderful.
Here's Albert Reynolds. Dribbles right at the wing, now to Young. He'll have to shoot the three with 3 on the shot clock, and he hits a dagger.
Wow, that's the game right there, boy.
Varsity Athletics were reintroduced at the school.
In February of 2006, I was named as the athletic director and came here in June of 06. And they had baseball as a club team, and Coach Ron Bradley had started that. And I came here and identified some sports that we wanted to start: men and women's basketball, men and women's soccer, and got those together. And that first year, we won 67% of our games, nearly 7 out of 10, which was one of the best winning percentages in the state. And then the next year, men's basketball has a great year. It goes to #1 in the country.
First ever conference championship in school history.
And look at the crowd coming out on the floor.
And I think we were surprised at how quickly RSU Athletics became not only successful, but a team that the community and the fan base endeared themselves to and followed passionately.
And along with the return of varsity athletics, there was a new mascot, the RSU Hillcat.
As a result of my work on the American Indian mascot issue, which has gone nationwide and worldwide, Dr. Wiley asked me if I would supervise the committee to determine the new mascot for Rogers State University. As a result of that, I headed up the committee and we went through a lot of names, none of which anybody really liked. And then way out of left field, a student group had hijacked an image off the internet and created an early prototype of the RSU Hillcat as a result of us being on a hill and there are bobcats running around. And that was way better than anything we ever came up with. So as a result of that, the committee liked it, the president liked it, marketing people liked it, and next thing you know, we have the RSU Hillcat.
Academics are important too, and the faculty has a strong commitment to teaching.
The thing we recognize and the thing that makes it so exciting is to know that we're changing lives. And this is a life-changing experience to these students. So every bit of encouragement, every bit of connection you can make to them, every time you personalize it and help them see that you see them, that is helpful to them. And when they do graduate and they do come back and they tell you about it, then you know. But you can see it in their eyes. It's a wonderful thing, being a college professor, a wonderful thing.
Many say that one of the reasons they like RSU is the small class size.
For years now, the presidents of this school, Dr. Mosher and Dr. Wiley and now Dr. Rice, I think have reaffirmed kind of a commitment that we will remain a relatively small school, a medium-sized at least, but I think we're all committed to keeping it at a personal level, keeping the classes small so that the students can have some attention from the instructors during class, not getting so big that everybody becomes a number. And I think that is something that is very special about this school and will remain.
Rogers State University is a standout among state colleges because it offers a mix of 4-year degree programs, more than 40 2-year associate degree programs.
And the uniqueness that we felt was important was to keep the community college component here, as well as adding the opportunity to grow into a 4-year school, but retaining the associate degrees. Very few schools in Oklahoma do that. In fact, only 2 other universities offer both a bachelor's degree as well as an associate's degree.
The school is still focused on serving the needs of its students and the community. One example of this is the excellent nursing program at the school.
It has enjoyed and it does continue to enjoy a reputation for excellence. We're very pleased with that. One measure of that excellence is in the pass rate for the graduates on the RN licensure examination. The 10-year average of RSU graduates is around 95–96%, and that's the 10-year average. You can compare that to probably a national average over that same time frame of around 85–86%.
providing both state-of-the-art learning environments and the opportunity to complete a 4-year nursing degree online gives students at RSU an advantage.
Now we're doing what we call blended courses, which is we're half online, half on campus, and trying to figure out additional ways where we can utilize software to make the technology classroom more personal and have avenues where the student can be much more engaged with the other students in the classroom as well as the faculty.
While RSU is continuing a tradition of welcoming students from abroad, the school is now able to expand students' experience with its first study abroad programs.
RSU recently has really put a lot of emphasis on the studies at large, study abroad. We have several programs going on now. And this is one of those things where students get information and experience outside the classroom. That's something that we really emphasize. And so the Montoni trip and the Studies at Large program that we have in the art area has been the flagship of that. And then, of course, we have the Washington, D.C. program and other such things, all which some of our students have participated in. Matter of fact, one of them is working for the National Endowment for the Arts. So this has been a very important progression for RSU.
From 1999 to 2009, the school has seen tremendous growth in enrollment. The increase in traditional full-time students called for the construction of new housing. The need for a new library appropriate to a 4-year institution led to construction of the Stratton Taylor Library, which was dedicated in 2003. A new student center opened.
This year, the Oklahoma Military Academy alumni stepped up. 10 of them stepped up to provide generous resources to furnish the OMA Student Lounge and our new Student Union.
RSU Public Television and RSU Radio are another way that the school reaches Northeast Oklahoma, and residents show their support for the innovative programming that continues a tradition of excellence in the region. In July of 2008, Dr. Larry Rice, a lifelong educator, administrator at the University of Tulsa, and former member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, was named the latest president of Rogers State University.
This institution, I think, always has the ability to reinvent itself. This institution, if you look back over 100 years, it's had several opportunities to close or die, but it's always had people that cared deeply about it, that wanted to reinvigorate and reinvent this great institution. So I'm convinced that our best days are still yet ahead. You know, with the visionary leadership of the University of Oklahoma's Board of Regents, and coupled with our citizens, coupled with our faculty and staff, I think the sky's the limit. I think we will not know this place in even another 10 or 15 years as we continue to develop international opportunities, as we continue distance learning. I think that the sky's the limit for this institution because it's always been resilient and it's always had people in the right place at the right time to reinvent it and perhaps even rescue it.
Today, Rogers State University is a respected institution of higher education, known for honoring past traditions, advocating innovation, and dedicated to providing higher education to all who dream of a better future.